First principles and first values. First principles and first values. So first principles and first values are deep structures of reality that live in us, as us, and through us. And I want to give an example of first principles and first values. I'm going to read a code, an evolutionary love code. And the code, which some of you have heard today, right, reads, right, the past, present, and future are first principles and first values of reality. The past calls us, the present calls us, and the future calls us. We're called by our past self, our present self, and by our future self. Unique self incorporates all three. Each call has a shadow expression and a light expression. Homo amor, the vision of the new human and the new humanity. Homo amor, who's the fulfillment of Homo sapien. Homo amor, who is self-reflective human, triumphing in the next level of evolution, this emergence of this new human possibility. It's one of the structures of cosmos. Remember, reality manifests in the first Big Bang, which expresses itself as matter. And matter is alive. Matter's not dead. Matter has its own agency. If you really understand the deep teachings at the leading edges of the new sciences today, it's really the leading edge. Matter has agency. Matter's alive. So matter is animated with interiority and self-actualizes. So matter self-actualizes into life. So the first Big Bang is the discretion of infinity in a point, the singularity, which then appears as the laws of cosmos, the configuration of intimate patterns of mathematics, right, and physics in cosmos. Matter appears, has its own internal agency. It's not inert matter. It's not dead matter. It's living matter. It's a living universe. Matter self-actualizes into life, the second Big Bang. And then life, matter come alive. The hills are alive, right? The sound of music, right? So the hills are alive right now, right? Matter becomes, triumphs into life. Life is now alive. Life goes through all of its stages like matter did, and then triumphs into this new configuration of intimate coherence, this intensification of intimacy, which is the 100 trillion neurons in your brain, almost as much, about 80% is the amount of stars in the sky, which becomes the self-reflective human, Homo sapien, which emerges between 70 and 200,000 years ago. And now we're just at the edge, at the leading edge of humanity. As we stand, our crisis is a birth, poised between dystopia and utopia. This crisis has to birth the new human and the new humanity, the fulfillment of Homo sapien as Homo amor. Okay? So this fulfillment of Homo sapien as Homo amor, now we go back to the code. Homo amor responds to the call of the future, the call of the present, right? The call of the past, the call of the present, the call of the future in every instant of eternal time. So within eternity, meaning the eternity that lives under the superficial present, there's the fullness of presence of the present. There's all of the past and all of the future. Responding to only one or even two of the calls, either the past or the present, right, generates distortion. Clarity and sacred power only emerge from the full response to the Holy Trinity of past, present, and future calls. Okay, so let's see if we can get what this means. Let's take this slow. So first, let's think about past, present. This is wildly exciting, and it could not be more relevant, more intimate, and more relevant. Okay, so here we go. So the notion that past, present, and future are first principles and first values of cosmos. What do we mean by that? So first, let's access it in yourself, right? Access it in yourself. When we're young, we have an enormous sense of the future. The present moves quickly, and there's very little past, right? As we get older, right, we hit into our 50s and our 60s and our 70s. There seems to be so much more past, right? We have a harder time accessing the future. We need to learn how to access the future when we're older, right? And the present seems, when we're full and alive, much more rich, but also more fleeting. Every human being lives in these three dimensions of time: past, present, and future. Now, there are shadow and light dimensions of each. So for example, when Buddhism points to the monkey mind, right? The chattering of the mind in the present that moves and darts from thing to thing, right? Social media instantiated in the human mind long before there was a computer, this darting chat, this stealing of attention, right? That's the superficial present, the busy present that you want to get underneath. That's the shadow of the present to access the full liberation of the present, right? The full liberation of the now. And nowing, what I want to call nowing, right? The verb of nowing, right? I'm actually activating the now. Is I'm accessing full liberation in the fullness of the present. I mean, I'm getting under the shadow of the present, the monkey mind, right? And I'm accessing, right, the full power, the liberation of the now, the power of the now, the ability to be fully here, right, in the now, and to say, here I am, hineni in Hebrew. Here I am, right, to the full call of the now. And every moment contains within it pain and healing. And the healing for that moment, for the pain of that moment, is only in that moment. But if I'm not in the moment, if I'm lost in future speculation, I'm lost in past rumination, right? I keep rehearsing the past, or I'm filled with anxiety about the future. I can't actually find the healing and wholeness of this moment, but I also can't find the call of this moment. There's a call of the present moment. Right? The call of the present moment is the experience of unique self, right? The unique self, uniqueness is not a cognitive structure, right? Uniqueness is actually a faculty of the eye of the heart. And this is very important. And I had an exchange about a decade ago with Cynthia Bourgeault, who actually just wrote a book called Eye of the Heart, right? About exactly this, that uniqueness is a quality which allows you to access, it's a heart quality, the unique call of the present. So that's the call of the present. We're going to talk about that much more, but I just want to get it on the table. So there's the shadow of the present, right? And there's the glory, the dignity, the power of the present. And that lives in you. It's a first principle and first value anthropologically that lives in you. And it's a dimension of cosmos. Time is real. Now, as we're going to see, there's also a dimension in you that lives inside of you that can get underneath time. We'll talk about that. Right? So there's both within me, there's the reality of past, present, and future that live in me anthropologically. And it's the reality of the space-time continuum. And I've got to live in between those three. Those are first principles, first values of cosmos, meaning they have value. The past. Let's think about the past for a second. There's the shadow of the past, where I keep rehearsing past events, right? You know, every once in a while, I'll talk to a couple. I don't do a lot. I used to do a lot more, but occasionally I'm drawn in when I feel it's really important. And I have just a little gift, which I'm so thankful for, which is to do certain kind of work with couples on their relationship. Right? And occasionally a couple will say to me, right, it'll burst out in the middle of a session and they'll say like, oh my God, and they'll start arguing about something that happened 7 years ago. Like, really? And it happens more than you would think. And how many of us are caught in rehearsing the past? We can't break the tyranny of the past. And actually, the only true slave driver is the belief that yesterday determines today. That's the tyranny of the past. But there's also enormous healing power in the past. And what is the great breakthrough of contemporary psychology? The great, right, Joseph Breuer is in Vienna, and he has these hysterical female patients who are thought to be insane, who are thought to be broken, others think them to be possessed. And he realizes, no, they're traumatized. Right? These hysterical women are traumatized by deep, profound traumas, often of sexual abuse, right, in the past. And actually, you can go into the past and re-narrate the past. You can reenact the past. And there's different ways to do it. And so Breuer begins to understand, and Freud, his student, emerges out of Breuer, that actually by going in and rebalancing and reconfiguring the past, we can actually elicit from the past enormous power, enormous gorgeousness, enormous healing. Psychology turns the past into a modality of profound eros and healing, because eros and healing are both healings to make whole. Eros is, you remember our Eros formula, Eros equals the reality's experience of radical aliveness, which also lives in me, moving towards ever desiring ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. So Eros and healing are the same. So we access from the past this incredible power of healing. And all of us, friends, have an enormous amount of unfinished business, right, from the past. Right? We have unfinished business from the past. Can you hear that? Can we feel that? So we've got to access the past. And we're going to talk more about the call of the past, right? The sacred call of the past and the call of the present next week and the week after. But for now, I want to, with your permission, I want to look at the third call. And it's really, really important. I want to try if we can frame this for a second. Okay? So psychological science focuses on the past, right? Does everyone get that? Let me find you in the chat box. Everyone get that now? Is that clear? Psychological science focuses on the past. It has its healing, potent call, which is unbelievably important, but it also has a shadow. And the shadow of psychology is its obsessive focus on the past. All of psychology, right, makes the past the ultimate cause of the present. Now, psychology was critically important in introducing the call of the past, but then what it did is it hyper-emphasized the past in a way that ultimately became destructive. So you go to a therapist and the therapist tells you it was your mother, it was this pattern, it was this dynamic, and it was that pattern, right? It was that, and that's all true, but it's true but partial. Psychology got lost in the past, right? Psychology got dominated by this tyranny of the past. Now, what responds to the tyranny of the past in psychology? Psychological science, what we might call enlightenment science. What does enlightenment science say? Enlightenment science says, don't look at the past, right? The liberation is available in the present, right? And that's the full power of the eternal now. The problem is, right? Just like psychology bypassed the full experience of true self, the experience of the full power of the eternal present, which is a live, living consciousness in which I participate. So enlightenment ignored psychology. So I want to track this with you. Right? Enlightenment science said it's all about the present, but it thought that by actually experiencing the fullness of my true self, right, the singular that has no plural, right, the eternal now that lives in me, as me, and through me, I'll have then done all my work on my past. That's not true. You can actually have a fully powerful experience of present moment enlightenment and be a jerk and behave terribly because you haven't actually done the work, right, on healing the traumas of the past. So you can't bypass the past. If you take only the call of the present, you bypass the call of the past, you distort, right? And I know some very, very special people who went to their enlightenment teachers and thought that actually having awakened realizations, experiences of waking up, would bypass the need to do the work on psychological maturity, to do the work on the trauma, to do the work on the negative patterns, to do the work on healing the shadow. That doesn't work. You can't bypass the call of the past. At the same time, psychology bypassed the present. Psychology said if you reorganize the past, and by the way, there's about 10 major schools of psychology, and their basic argument, they argue along two lines, I'm just only going to mention now, but you could map all 10 schools of psychology based on what modality do you use to re-narrate the past. But pretty much psychology says it's all about the past. But that's tyrannical. Psychology's got to actually move beyond the personal to access the wider field. You got to walk in the wide places. You actually have a full, potent experience of the human being's true nature. And most of psychology never access the true nature of a human being, right? It operates only within separate self. Psychology is the past of your separate self, of your skin-encapsulated ego and its patterns, but never accesses the full power of living agency, right? Ecstatic presence, right? Of your true nature, your true self, which is the full being consciousness of all of reality that lives in you in this moment. So both psychological science and enlightenment science are true but partial, right? We together? We together? This is really important. This is not Wilbur. This is not Wilbur, Rob, right? This is kind of a basic idea, right, of psychology. Ken, right? Ken and I are aligned on this idea. The first person who talked about waking up and growing up was actually John Welwood in a book, Psychology of Awakening. But we're talking about it in a very different way. You've got to be really careful not to reduce something to something you heard that was similar from someone else. We're saying something in a completely new, fresh way. So let's step, Rob, find me in the kind of full presence. We're talking about the relationship of psychological science and enlightenment science in these two different calls, and how each one is mutually reinforcing and each one has shadow. Now we're going to introduce a third dimension. And the third dimension is evolutionary science. Evolutionary science, okay? And evolutionary science is not about the call of the past or the present. It's about the call of the future, okay? So Rob, you with me, brother? Okay, and whenever, right, just find me. Let's find this all the way inside. Okay, and for those of you who are not present with us live, if you're listening, occasionally when I call someone's name, I'm having a conversation with them because they're writing in the chat box. Okay, so stay close with me. Okay, stay close because this is really deep. It's very beautiful. This is like so deep. It's so beautiful. You can't access the fullness of who you are unless you access the call of the future. I don't just have a past self that needs to be reorganized and reconfigured, as important as that is. I don't just have a present self, which I need to enter into its fullness in order to be liberated. I'm actually called by a future self, right? I not only have to recover the memory of my past, I have to recover a memory of the future. And it's only the call of the future that can lift me up. When I'm stuck in the mud, I can't be pushed out. I have to be pulled out by the vitality of the future that adheres in the present and calls me forward. So when I ask everyone, just if you can for a second, if you're listening, close your eyes for a second. Right? Close your eyes for a second and see if you can access your future self. Your future self literally calls you in the second. Your future self adheres in the present. The only voice of the future in the present is your accessing of that future self. And there's your individuated future self, and there's the future self of the entire community. So there's a covenant between generations. And the covenant between generations is we commit in this present moment, in the fullness of this present, we commit to access the voice of future generations and to commit to be covenanted with them. There's not just a covenant between the human being and spirit. There's a covenant between spirit across the ages incarnate as human beings. And we have to take responsibility for the future. And when we stand before existential risk and catastrophic risk, which is the risk that there could be no future, if we can't hear the future self of the community in the present, then we actually can't respond, right, to the overwhelming moral imperative of this moment. And that's true for our collective lives, but it's also true for our individual lives. You can't actually step and become and be, we can't be Homo, amor as individuals or as a community unless we can actually respond to our future self. Okay? So we're just going to close our eyes for a second, right? And actually feel the tug of my future self, right? Feel the tug of my future self. And I want to just try and access this with you, right? In three dimensions. So I want to give you, with your permission, three images, okay? First, I'm going to open up Mark Twain's diary. And Mark Twain, in about 1875, shared in Harper Magazine pieces of his diary. And this is a particular story of Mark Twain, who's a famous writer. But he writes, and Mark Twain is one example of tens of thousands that we've collected. So he writes in his diary in about June 1858. He's in the port in St. Louis, and he's with his brother Henry. And he writes as follows in his diary, and he refused to publish this and other events like it in his life because he was afraid of public ridicule in the mid-19th century. Here's what he writes. He said, in the morning when I awoke, I'd been dreaming, and the dream was so vivid, so like reality that it deceived me, and I thought it was real. But of course, friends, as we'll see, it was real. Right? In the dream, I had seen Henry, my brother, as a corpse, meaning he had died. He lay in a metal burial coffin case. He was dressed in a suit of my clothing, and on his chest, on his breast, lay a great bouquet of flowers, mainly white roses, with a red rose in the center. So Twain gets dressed, right? And he goes on with his day, and he just, right? And he says to himself, he writes in his diary, there's obviously nothing real about this. He spends the whole day with Henry. It was just a dream. But sadly, it wasn't just a dream. A few weeks later, Henry is badly burned in a boiler explosion, and then he's killed actually by accident when a young doctor gives him an overdose of opium. Now, usually, right, the dead are buried in a simple pine coffin, and Jeffrey Kripal writes up this story, right? But there's many, many stories like it. And Twain, right, in Harper Magazine tells the story, right? Listen what happens, right? His brother dies. And here's what happened. Twain, Harper's Magazine, 1875. When I came back and entered the dead room, Henry lay in that open case, and he was dressed in a suit of my clothing. He had borrowed it without my knowledge during our last trip in St. Louis. And then I recognized instantly that this was my dream of several weeks before that was being precisely reproduced. There was Henry. A woman had given us $60. So we got not a wood casket, we got a metal casket. So there's Henry in a suit of my clothes and a metal casket. There was only one detail missing, writes Twain, there were no flowers. And as I noticed there were no flowers, a woman walks in with a bouquet of white flowers with a red rose in the middle and places the flowers on my brother's chest. You got that, everybody? That's not one example. This is the high strangeness of reality. What you understand from this story is that the future is already present in the present. Now, in the mid-19th century, people would challenge Twain, maybe he was making it up. But since the late 19th century, when Henry Sedgwick, professor in Cambridge, and William James at Harvard started the Psychical Research Societies, we've now documented thousands of cases of these stories, right, in which we actually guarded against all possibilities of fraud through very rigorous investigation. This is absolutely empirically true, right? To deny this, you have to be a blithering idiot. I apologize. This is what William James called radical empiricism. This is no longer in the realm of an anecdote. There's now hard empirical evidence gathered cross-culturally that the future speaks in the past. That's a very important piece of radical empirical information. Twain was afraid to publish it in the 19th century because we didn't have radical empirical data collections, so he could have easily been, as he was, accused of forgery. Now we've corrected that in the last 100 years. In the last 125, 30 years. Does everyone get that? This is hugely important. This is hugely important. All right, wow. Wow, it's a big deal. Okay, now come deeper with me, okay? Come deeper with me. I see if I can access this with you. I want to tell you a second story, and this is a story from the mystical literature. It's a different way into the future. So this is a story about a particular mystical master who lived in a town in Eastern Europe, and the name of the town was Karlin, Karlin, still a town in Europe. And there was this great master of Karlin, and in his lineage, there were particular times in which, right, and just stay close to this, okay? There were particular times in which one would do particular prayers in his lineage. There was a time for the morning prayer, a time for the afternoon prayer, a time for the evening prayer. And he would always break the law and do everything in its wrong time. So he gathers all of his disciples and they get into his, it's called an agala in the original language, into his kind of horse-driven, wagon. And there's usually only room for 100 people in it, but oh my God, right? There's like 200 people in it. They're all right hanging on the wagon, and they drive and they drive and they drive and they drive from Karlin until they get to this hamlet of Polish peasants on the very, very outskirts of this remote region. And it's like midnight. and you have to finish praying the afternoon prayer, before the sun sets. And people notice, right, right, everyone's sleeping, but people notice, people feel someone's in town. They begin to awaken from their sleep, but there's just one person who comes out. This man who was so old, you can't even imagine, was like 100 years old, 150 years old, who knows? And he says, welcome, welcome, welcome. What can I do for you? And the master, the great master, Aaron of Carlin, says, I want to pray the afternoon prayer. And he says, of course, here's a building, right? Please, in this building. He says, no, I'm going to pray outside. He says, of course, full permission to pray outside in this Polish peasant village. And oh my God, friends, holy brothers, holy sisters, they begin to pray like you can't even imagine, right? They're burning. There's like a burning fire moving in ecstasy, right? Alive, awake in the village. And all of the Polish peasants wake up and they feel the fire and they come with buckets of water because they think there's a fire to put out the fire. And they realize it's an entirely different kind of fire. And they join in prayer, right? And these disciples of this master from Karlin and the Polish peasants are screaming in ecstasy and praying together and storming all the heavens and opening all the gates. And it's like it's never been before. It's unimaginable. Wow. Right? And then they all bring, right, these fruits and these wines. And after they prayed, they have this fistula, this great feast of incredible and unimaginable rejoicing. And then it's over. Now, friends, open your hearts. Open your hearts. We're going to go to the inside of the inside now, to the deepest of the deep, right? As they're getting ready to leave and the peasants are hugging the mystical disciples. Aaron of Carlin looks at that old man who had greeted them and he says, "Nu, you have a message for me, don't you?" And the old man is startled and he says, "Yes, I have a message for you. And please let me tell you, I am 107 years old. And 100 years ago, on my 7th birthday, a great master called the Baal Shem, the master of the good name, came. And he came also at midnight. And he asked to pray the afternoon prayer. And there was this incredible fire, and the peasants came out, and they danced, and they sang, and they screamed in mad delight the prayer together, and they ate, and they feasted. And when it was over, he said to me, young boy, 7-year-old boy, and 100 years from now, in the future, someone in my lineage who's carrying on this great work will be here. Tell him I was here before. Tell him I was here before. And tell him I'm with him now. Wow. Right? Right? Can everyone feel that? Right? So when you open up, right, into the ecstasy of the present, the future speaks in the present, literally. You can actually access in the present both the voice of the past and the Baal Shem 100 years before moves into the future, right? Oh my God. So Aaron of Carlin in the future hears the past. He's called by the past. The past and the future merge with each other. And both the Baal Shem Tov, the master of the good name, and Aaron of Carlin, they're both called by the same future, by the same hope. Hope is a memory of the future. Does everyone feel that? Hope is a memory of the future. I want to say it again. Hope is a memory of the future, right? Can you feel that? Hope is, right? The hope of my life, the fullness of my life is my future self calling me, and my future self calls me. My future self breaks the boundaries between present, past, and future when I actually step out of, right, my narrow self, my contraction, my monkey mind into ecstasy, into ecstasis. I chant, I dance, I sing, I eye gaze. I step into a sacred text and let my heart be blown open, right? I enter into the fullness of the ecstasy of the embodiment of the physical body or the heart or the mind. And it all opens up. And I can actually feel the future calling me. I can actually feel the tug of the future. One of the great masters, beloved of Kafka, Nachman of Bratslav, says in Aramaic, when you wake up, the first thing you do is you access a zichron al-mada'ati. In Aramaic, you access a memory of the future world. Right? We're called, friends, by our future selves. Right? And I can't live without that call. Now stay with me one last step, okay? Can we do one last step together? Like deep in. We're not going to finish it this week, but I want to go one last step, okay? One last step. It's so deep. You can't heal by reorganizing the past. And it's why one of the things that we're working on as an expression, right, part of the new story, which is to weave these first values and first principles into a new story. Right? The first values and first principles are not the new story. They're the thread from which we weave the new story, which becomes the ground, right, of the global ethos for the global civilization. So you begin to see how that's true here. When I realize that I've got to access the future self, and I realize there's the future self of the personal and of the community, I begin to experience the covenant between generations and the call of the future, which demands the fullness of my presence. And if I can't hear the voice of the future, we're not going to have a future. And that's the nature of existential risk. Existential risk demands that I step out of the present and actually hear the call of the future. But it's as vital, as existentially critical in our personal lives, right? Because I can do all the therapy in the world, and I can go from therapist to therapist and do every modality, but I won't actually come home. Yes, I need to work with the past deeply and profoundly, but it won't bring me home by itself. I need to actually also access the future. And psychology got obsessively lost in the past, right? But I can't just access, right, enlightenment science, the present. I've got to feel the call of my unique self. Unique self is the quality of the eye of the heart, which prospects, which anticipates, which can hear. It's the ear, the listening heart, which can access the shudder of the future, the tremor of the future in the fullness of the now. Right? That's what unique self is. Evolutionary unique self. It's not just unique self, it's evolutionary unique self. And evolutionary unique self is the call of evolution that lives in me. And we want to call that, right? Barbara and I called that together our future self. That's our future self. That's the call of the future. It's only the call of the future that can heal you. And actually, evolutionary science, unlike enlightenment science, which focuses on the present, psychological science, which focuses on the past, evolutionary science, right? Evolutionary spirituality, right, is, right, the call of the future self. When I say I am evolution, when Homo, amor says I am evolution, it means I'm responsive to my future self. I can feel and hear the tug of the future, right? When the Baal Shem Tov dances with ecstasy in Karlin, he can feel that 100 years from now, he needs to be there to hold the hands, right, of the successor in his lineage who's going to hold that call 100 years into the future, right? So as we create together this band of outrageous lovers, we've got to create a ground that we're going to be able to pass this to the next generation, and to create schools, right, of activist, outrageous lovers who will actually express and share and spread these first principles and first values and be storytellers, and to actually tell this great new story. And we each need to be storytellers through our unique self. But for now, I want to just conclude with this. Unique self is the antenna. It's the sense organ. Unique self is the sense organ which centrally feels into the future and can hear the call of the future. Like, wow. Here's the last thing. So in 2013, 4 writers in psychology published an article in the Journal of Psychological Sciences, a heavy academic article, in which they accessed articles from about 5 years before, 2007 and 8, also from heavy academic journals in psychology, which talked about prospection. What's a prospector? So in Europe and America and Asia, there were always prospectors prospecting for gold. And they were all about, they might find gold tomorrow. There were gold rushes all over the world. So the prospector prospects for gold. And these authors then published a book. They spent $5 million researching it, worked on just one book. And they called the book in 2015, Homo Prospectus. And they challenged psychology for the first time and said psychology is lost in the past and understands the human being as being an expression only of the causation of the past. And I was ecstatic when I read the book, because we had been saying this for 10 years. but I didn't have enough evidence in learning cognition theory, and they provided the evidence. So we're actually incorporating that book, Homo Prospectus, into our vision of Homo Amor. Right? Wow. Because Homo Amor is part of our larger vision of first principles and first values, which tell the new story, right? And we actually integrate all sorts of different meta theories, right, into this larger new vision of cosmoerotic humanism, of Homo Amor, right? Future. I'm called by the future. So with your permission, friends, just the last second, last little story, okay? Last little story for you. And we can actually feel it together, right? And if you can close your eyes, can you, is that okay? Close your eyes for a second and just feel the tug of your future self, and maybe write down, if you want to open your eyes, you can even write in the chat box, close your eyes for like 60 seconds, and then write in the chat box, what is your future self calling you towards, right? What's your future self calling you towards? And if I can, let me just tell you this story just to open up the space. And then if you have a piece of paper in front of you and you're not listening live, that's totally perfect. Just write it on a piece of paper. Here's the story. It's a story that right, ages ago, I kind of came into my consciousness, and it's about a little boy who's just been confirmed, right, in his local church or his synagogue or his mosque, wherever it was, and he's excited, and he wants to buy himself a present, and he goes to his piggy bank, his big piggy bank, and he has exactly the right amount of change. He goes to the neighborhood store, lays out, takes his piggy bank, and puts all the change down on the counter. He has exactly the right amount of money, the right amount of coins. And he says to the storekeeper, I want to buy that kite, K-I-T-E, kite, that big red kite behind you. Storekeeper says, you have enough money? Sure, I do. He has exactly the right amount of money. It's a miracle, just enough money to also buy some string. And he ties the string to the kite, and he goes to this huge park, right, in the center, right, of Constantinople, where he lives, right, in Turkey. This gorgeous, big, beautiful park, and he ties the string to the kite, and it's a gusty, windy day in Constantinople in the fall, and the wind lifts the kite into the sky, and he lets out the string, and a little more string, and a little more string, and a little more string, until the kite is so far away you can't see it. And when you look from the outside, all you do is you see a kid running in Constantinople in the park on a Sunday with string in his hand, and an old man representing, right, the establishment of the present and all the corruptions of the past, says to the kid, what are you doing? He says, what do you mean, what am I doing? The young boy says, I'm flying a kite. And the old man says, what do you mean you're flying a kite? Right, you're running with string in your hand. I don't see a kite. No one can see a kite. He says, no, I'm flying a kite. The old man insists and says, how do you know there's a kite? And the boy says, I know there's a kite because I can feel the tug, T-U-G, the tug. I can feel the tug. That's the call of the future, my friends. That's the future self, right? The future self. Can you feel the tug? Feel the tug right now, calling us. Who can feel it? And you can feel the tug calling us into the future. If I lose access to the future, I fall into depression. It's the mistake of Enlightenment science. Right? You cannot actually be only in the fullness of the present. And you can't just rework the past. You have to feel the tug of the future. And it doesn't matter whether you're 72 or 81 or 89, right? Or 19. The future might be the next afternoon or the next 5 years. But the future, you can recreate the world. The future calls us. Homo amor is filled with hope because Homo amor experiences evolutionary possibility, the possibility of possibility, which is the greatness of tomorrow, the call of the future, our future self. That's a first principle and first value of a cosmos. Last sentence, notice what we've done in terms of first principles and first values. We've taken the first principle and first value of past, present, and future that live anthro-ontologically inside of us, that are structures of reality, and we've taken those threads and woven them into the new story, which, as you can see, becomes the ground for a global ethos, for a global civilization.